There are many proposals to analyze what are the alternative. As anarchist communists, we are proposing the abolition of prisons and the police. For people who argue or trying to struggle with this idea, how you can function without the police and prisons, despite the concept of prisons we know it, then we had existed without it for literally 90% of human history. But regardless, then we'll mention, what about crime? How are you gonna solve crime without prisons and the police? But there is an answer. For anarchists, crime can best be described as antisocial act or behavior which harms someone else, which invades their personal space. Anarchists, in other words, believe that to act criminally means to violate the liberty of others, and so criminals in free society will be those who will reach and roach on personal integrity, liberty, as well as well-being to others. This definition of crime is similar, of course, to that used in capitalist society, but libertarians note that this state defines as crime many things which are in a sane society would not, such as say consensual act of adults in private or expropriation of private property. Similarly, a free society would consider as antisocial many acts which the state defends under capitalism, such as the appropriation of resources or the exploitation of others' labors. This is to be expected, as social customs evolve and reflect the socio-economic basis of a given society. As Metatesta argue, naturally, the crime we are talking about are antisocial acts, that those of which offend human feelings and which infringe the right of others to equally in freedom, and not the many actions which is the penal code punishment, simply because they offended against the privilege of the dominant classes. Anarchists argue that the root cause for this crime is not some perversely of human nature or original sin, but is due to the type of society which our people are modeled. For example, anarchists point out that by eliminating private property, crime will be reduced significantly, since most crime today is currently motivated by evils stemming from private property, such as poverty, homelessness, unemployment, and alienation. Moreover, by adopting anarchist methods of non-authoritarian child rearing and education, most of the ramming crimes will also be eliminated, because they are largely due to antisocial behavior, perverse and cruel secondary drives that develop because of authoritarian child rearing practices. However, as long as the few violating of the equal freedom of others, we must defend ourselves. First, we cannot be said by government are required to protect people from crime and criminals. Rather, as Alexander Berkman argued, does not government itself create a whole condition which mark for crime? Does not the invasion and violence upon which all government rests cultivate the spirit of intolerance and persecution of hatred and more violence? Crime, then, is the result of economic condition of social inequality of wrongs and evils which government and monopoly are parents. Government and law can only be punished the criminal. They neither cure nor prevent crime. The only real cure for crime is to abolish its causes. The government can never do, because it is there preserve those very causes. This suggests the crimes resulting from government, from its oppression and injustice, from inequality and poverty, would disappear under anarchy. This constitutes by far the greatest percentage of crime. And even the FBI had confirmed that capitalism is the cause of basically all crimes of economic inequality, homelessness, unemployment. Again, the FBI had confirmed that capitalism is the root cause of basically all crime. Note, we should not forget that today we are subject to rule by the antisocial, for the owners and rulers are criminals who are powerful and have organized their dominance on a stable basis. Who is more of a fate than the owners who get weekly stealing the product of workers' labor? Crime, therefore, cannot be divorced from society within it is occur. Society, in Emma Goldman's work, gets the criminals it deserve. For example, anarchists do not think it is unusual nor unexpected that crime exploded under the pro-free market capitalist regime of Thatcher and Reagan. Crime, the most obvious symptom of social crisis, took 30 years to double in Britain, from 1 million incident in 1950 to 2.2 million in 1979. However, between 1979 to 1992, the crime rate more than doubled, exceeding the 5 million mark in 1992. These 13 years were marked by a government firmly committed to the free market and the individual responsibility. It was entirely predictable that the social disruption, automation of individuals, and the increased poverty caused by freeing capitalism from social control would rip society apart and increase criminal activity. Also, unsurprisingly, from an anarchist point of view, under this pro-market government, we also saw a reduction in civil liberties, increased state centralization, and the destruction of local government. As Malatesta put it, the classical liberalism, where the government represents who had no other effect, for the government's power repression must be forced increase a free competition result in more discord and inequality. Hence, the apparent paradox of government with flowing rhetoric about individual rights and free market getting the state off our backs, increase the state power and reluctantly rise while holding office during a crime explosion is no paradox at all. The conjunction of the rhetoric of individual freedom and the vast increase in state power, argues Carlo Betterman, is not unexpected. At a time when the influence of contract doctrine is extended into the last, most intimate nooks and crannies of social life, taken for conclusion, contrast undermine the condition of his own existence. Hobbes showed long ago that contrast all the way down requires absolutism and the sword to keep way at bay. Capitalism and the contract theory on which it is built will inevitably rip apart society. It is based upon a vision of humanity. It is isolated individual with no connection other than of money. Such a vision cannot help to institutionalize antisocial act. As Peter Kropotkin argued, it is not love and not even sympathy upon which society is based on mankind. It is the conscious, be it only in the station of an instinct of human solidarity. It is an unconscious recognition of the force that is borrowed by each man and woman from the practice of mutual aid, of the close dependency of everyone's happiness upon the happiness of all, and the sense of justice will equally, fully bring the individual to consider the right of every other individual as equal to his or her own. The social atomization required created by capitalism destroyed the basic bonds of society, namely human solidarity, and hierarchy crushed the individual required to understand that we share a common humanity with others who understand why we must be ethical and respect other rights, especially as Richard Wilkinson and Kate Picker note the spirit level, why more equal society always do better, more unequal society have more crime and bigger prison population, equally as well as reducing crime constantly deliver other advantages for people. We are not saying, however, that anarchists reject the concept of individual responsibility, while recognizing that rape, for example, is the result of a social system which replaces sexuality as based on patriarchy, i.e., rape has more to do with power than sex. Anarchists do not sit back and say it's society's fault. Individuals have to take responsibility for their own actions and recognize the consequence of those actions. Part of the current problem with the law codes is the individual have been deprived of the responsibility for developing their own ethical codes, so they are less likely to develop civilized social standards. Therefore, while anarchists reject the ideas of law and a specialized justice system, they are not blind to the fact that antisocial action may not totally disappear in a free society, nor are they blind by the fact that regardless of our hopes about a free society reducing crime, we will not create it overnight. All bad decisions or passions will not disappear as a stroke. There will still be a long time that who will feel tempted to impose their will on others with violence. We will wish to exploit favorable circumstances to create privilege for themselves. Therefore, some sort of justice system will still be necessary. The deal with the remaining crime and to adjudicate dispute between people. This does not, it must be stretched, signify some sort of contradiction with their anarchism. Anarchists have never advocated the kind of freedom which assumes that people can do what they want. When people object to anarchy, they often ask about those who will steal, murder, rape, and so forth. It seems to assume that such people will be free to act as they like. This is, needless to say, an utter misunderstanding of both our ideas and freedom in general. Simply put, people oppose themselves by force, not on other than they will be governed. They will be the government, and we will oppose them with force. For if today we want to make a revolution against the government, it is not in order to submit ourselves spontaneously to a new oppressor. This applies to defending a free society against organized counter-revolution, against those within conducting antisocial criminal activities. The principle is the same, it's just the scale where it is different. It should be remembered that just because the state monopoly or organized public survey does not mean that the abolition of state means the abolition of what is useful and it provides. For example, many state-owned and run train network with the abolition of the state does not mean there will no longer be any trains. In a free society, management of the railway will be done by the rail workers themselves in association with the community. The same applies to antisocial behavior, so we find Kropotkin, for example, pointed to how voluntary association will substitute themselves for the state in all of its junctions, including the mutual protection and the defense of the territory. This implied that what term justice, namely the resolution of dispute and antisocial act, crime, anarchists argue that people will not allow their well-being and their freedom to be attacked with impunity, and if it's necessary arose, they would take measures to defend themselves against antisocial activities of a few. But to do so, we propose to serve by the people whose profession is the making of laws, but other people spend their lives seeking out, inventing law breakers. This means that in a free society, the resolution of antisocial behavior will rest in the hands of all, not specialized bodies separate from and above the masses. As Proudhon put it, in anarchy will be seen the police, jurisdiction, administration, everywhere committed to the hands of the workers. And so, let each household, each factory, each association, each municipality, each district attend to its own police, administrate carefully its own affair, and nation will be police and magistrate. We need to had to be watched and ruled as to pay your year in and year out. Millions? Let us abolish perfect commission and policemen too. Precisely how this will work will be determined by free people based on circumstances they face. All we can do is sketch out likely possibilities and make suggestions. In terms of resolving dispute between people, it's like some of the formal authoritarian system will develop. The parties involved will agree that the land they seize to a third party, for example, a communal jury or mutually agreed individual or individuals. There will be the possibility that the parties cannot agree, or if the victims were dead, then the issue will be raised as a community assembly and a court, quote unquote, to look into the house. These courts will be independent from the commune. Their independence strengthened by popular election instead of executive appointment of judges, by protecting the jury system by random selection of citizens, and to all deputies will be submitted to juries that will judge not only the fact that made the law justice of the law or social custom, its applicability to the given circumstances, and the penalty of damage to the inflicted because of its infractionism. For Tucker, Benjamin Tucker, who wrote The Individual Anarchist, Tucker, the jury was a splendid institute, the principle of safeguard against oppression. As anarchists suggest, when differences were to arise between men, would not arbitrarily voluntarily accepted, or pressure of public opinion, but perhaps more likely to establish where the right lies, though other responsible magistrate will have the right to adjudicate on everything and everybody as very competent and therefore unjust. It is in the aberration system a communal assembly that the constitute antisocial behavior will be discussed in general. So, in terms of antisocial events, when they happen, where the remains of resident criminals, the collective directed concern should think of placing them in a position where they can do no harm without delegating to anyone the specific function of persecuting criminals. In the case of police forces, this will not exist either as a public or private specialized body or company. If a local community did not consider the public safety required a body of people who could not be called upon for help, we imagine that a new system would be created. Such a system would not entrust it as to today to a special official body. All able-bodied inhabitants would be called upon to take turns in the security measure instituted by the commune. This system could be based around a voluntary militia in which all members of the community could serve as they so desire. Those who serve will not constitute a professional body, instead they serve will be made up of local people who will join for short periods of time and be replaced and they abuse their positions. Hence the likelihood that a communal militia will become corrupted by power like the current police force or a private security firm exercising policing function will be vastly reduced. Moreover, by accustoming a population to interfere in antisocial as a part of the militia, they will be empowered to do so when not an active part of it, so reducing the need for its services even more. In this way, we will defend ourselves without delegation to anyone the special function of the defense of society, and this is the only effective method of stopping and reducing antisocial activity. Such a body will not have a monopoly of protecting them others, but simply be a call of require. It will be no more by a monopoly of defense. Then the current fire service is a monopoly. Individuals are not banned from putting out fire because of the fire services says. Similarly, individuals will be free to help stop antisocial crime by themselves when association with others in an anarchist society. Of course, there are antisocial acts which occur without witnessing, and so the guilty party cannot be readily identified. If such an act did occur, we can imagine an anarchist community taking two courses of action. The intra-party may look into the fact themselves or appoint their agent to do so, or more likely an ad hoc group would be elected of a community assembly to investigate specific crimes of this sort, subject to control and recall by the community. Once the investigating body thought they had enough devices, it would inform the community as well as the affected parties and then organize a court. Of course, a free society will produce different solutions to such a problem. Solutions no one had considered yet also been segregated are just that, suggestions. As often stated, the prevention is better than cure. This is true of crime as of a disease, and so crime is best fought by rooting out its causes, as opposed to punishing those who act in response to these causes. As Goldman argued, crime is not by misdirect energy, so long as every institution today, economic, political, social, moral, conspire to misdirect human energy into wrong channels, so long as most people are out of place doing things they hate to do, living life they loathe to live. Crime will be inevitable, and all the laws of the status can only be increased, but never do away with crime. Eric Fromm's decides later made the same point. Therefore, by reorganizing society so they empower everyone and actively encourage use of all of our intellectual, emotional, and sensual ability, crime will be soon cease to be a huge problem that it is now. As for the antisocial behavior or clashes between individuals that might still exist in such a society, it will be dealt with a system based on respect for the individual and a recognition of the social root of the problem. Restraint will be kept to a minimum. Anarchists think the public opinion and social pressure will be main means of preventing antisocial act in the anarchist society. With such action is boycotting and ostracize use as powerful sanctions to convince those tempting to the errors of their worst. Extensive non-cooperation by neighbors, friends, and workmates will be the best means of stopping acts which harms others, as Malatesta show. In order for crime to be treated rationally, in order to seek for its causes, really do everything possible to eliminate it, it is necessary for its task to be entrusted those who are exposed and suffer the consequence of crime. In other words, the whole public, and not those who the assistant of crime is a source of power and earnings. In an anarchist system of justice, it will have a lot more aboriginal societies simply because they are examples of such social orders without the state. Indeed, many of the ideas considered as essential to justice today can be found in such society. As Peter Kokoke argued, we are imagining that we have made great advances in introducing, for instance, the jury. We all have done is return the institution of the so-called barbarian after having changed it to the advancement of the ruling classes. Like Aboriginal justice, documented by Robert Ross in returning to the teachings exploring Aboriginal justice, anarchists contend that justice was achieved by teaching and healing of all involved. Public condemnation of the wrongdoing will be key aspects of this process, but the wrongdoer will remain part of the community, so that their effects of their actions on others to term of grief and pain costs. It will be likely that the wrongdoers will be expected to try to make amends of their act by commanding services and helping victims and their families. To understand how humans have lived as anarchist communist society for 90% of human existence, there are many books that goes into great detail of the origins of humanity, like The Dawn of Everything, Fragment Anarchist Anthropology, The Anthropological Theory of Value, The Art of Not Being Governed, People Without Government, Man the Hunter, Hierarchy in the Forest, Mothers and Others, African Anarchists and the History of the Movement, The Ecology of Freedom, The Rise and Dissolution of Anarchy, etc. So, if we are said, so from a practical point of view, if the almost all anarchists oppose prison on both practical grounds and ethical grounds. Prisons have numerous negative effects on society as well as often reinforce criminal, i.e. antisocial behavior. Anarchists used to auto accurate description of prison as universally a crime, for the first time criminals learn to new techniques and able adapt to the prevailing ethical standard within them, as the prison will have the effect of increasing the criminal tendency of those sentenced so to the conduct productive. In addition, prisons do not affect the social condition which promote many forms of crime. Simply put, prisons do not improve the prisoner. It does not prevent him from committing more crimes. It does not achieve any of the ends it has of itself. Moreover, they are a failure in the terms of their impact to subject to them. We know what the prison mean when they mean broke down body, spirit degradation, consumption, insanity. The Ukrainian Free Territories, when Ukraine was an anarchist communist society, took the usual anarchist position on prisons. The prisons are the symbol of the servitude of the people. They are always built only to subjugate the people, the workers and peasants. Free people have no use for prisons. Where a prison says the people are not free. In keeping with this attitude, the Makovich demolished prison where they met. So, with the exception of Benjamin Tucker, the American individual anarchist, which is just anarchist but not taken all the way, no major anarchist writers support the institution. Few anarchists think the private prisons, like private policemen, are compatible with their notions of freedom. However, all anarchists are against the current justice system, which seems to them to organize around revenge and punish effects and not fixing the causes. However, there are psychopaths and other people in any society who are too dangerous to be allowed to walk freely. Restraint in this case will be the only option. Such people may have to isolate from others for their own and others safely, perhaps mental hospitals will be used or area guaranteed for their use created, perhaps as an island for example. However, such a case we hope will be rare and should be careful for according to the most humane methods of treating the mentally afflicted. The one thing that we need to be avoid in this creation of professional and specialized justice system is there will be a key by the means of which the state will constitute itself. As Malatesta explained, the major damage caused by crime is not as such as the single essential nature of violence of the rights of view individuals, but the danger it will serve as an opportunity and pretext for a condition of authority that, with the outward appearance of defending society, will subdue and oppress it. In other words, it will be great price of foolishness to protect oneself from a few people, violent people, few idlers, and some degenerates by opening school for idleness and violence. The libertarian perspective of crime does not rest on an idealized vision of people. We do not believe, as Malatesta suggests, the infallibility, nor even the great general goodness of the masses, where we believe even the less in the infallibility and goodness of those who seize power legislated. So we must avoid creation of bodies specialized in police work. So instead of prisons and legal goal based on the concept of punishment and revenge, anarchists support the use of public opinion and pressure to start antisocial and the need to therapeutically rehabilitate those who commit them. Rather than a parasitic legal system which creates and defends inequality and privileges, anarchists agree with Prokopkin that liberty, equality, and practical human sympathy are the most effective barriers we can oppose to the antisocial instinct of the certain among us. No, I'm not gonna use the joke. In summary, the anarchists will spend considerable time discussing the issue, somewhat ironically, given that many think the issue of crime is the weakest point of anarchist case. The online of the associated with the problem were established anarchist theory, but in terms what not to do in terms of combating both crime and its causes. Anarchy is the base of the people being free, but freedom does not mean the freedom to violate the equal freedom of others. That is oppression, that is exploitation, that is the embryo of the state of capitalism.